Hello. Yes, I can hear that. Can you hear that? Yes. Any nods? I can. I got a double thumbs up from the back there. Welcome to the last session in Theatre One today. My name is Colin Mulberg. I'm director of Colin Mulberg Consulting, and I've been hosting a wide range of talks in this theatre. This is the very last one. Occasionally, they're rowdy in the theatre next door, and it blocks our sound out. So what we're doing is we are recording this session, and at some point in the future, but not very soon, it will come online in case you miss anything. We're going to allow a good time at the end for questions, and we've got a roving mic to help with that. So all I'm going to do now is, I'm not even going to introduce, I'm just going to hand over to Dan, and he's going to talk about this subject, which is kind of about venues moving outside their comfort zones. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you very much. Colin, can we pinch that mic if that's all right? Oh, I have my own microphone. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me right at the back? Okay, I'm going to try some audience participation because it's really noisy in here. Oh, and I'm supposed to stay here as well for the camera. So, I'm going to say, oh no, this is an Australian thing. I can't do that here. I'm so used to going Aussie, 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 and you go queer, queer, queer. So I'm just going to do something else, which is just to say, heritage, heritage, heritage. What is wrong with you? Okay. You have come to see Queer Museum Enterprise. We are meeting very shortly the next generation of leaders in the sector. So I want to hear a really echoing, booming queer from you to welcome them. So on the count of three, I want you to shake the very foundations. And it's really easy to because they already started knocking down the foundations over there, right? Shake the very foundations of this place. I want to hear the largest echoing queer that has ever been heard in this space. So on the count of three, right? 1, 2, 3. Queer! Again! 1, 2, 3. Queer! All right, they all know we're here now. Welcome. It's a delight to have you here. And if I could, very quickly, just say, the team here, we are from Queer Britain. Well, we're from different organisations, but we're here representing Queer Britain, the national LGBTQ+ museum that opened this weekend in King's Cross, thanks to Stephanie here. But also each of us sort of represent different parts of the Queer Heritage and Collections Network as well. So that means if you are here to find out more about what you can do in your collection, your gallery, library, archive, and museum, and I met somebody from Q earlier as well, so we'll include an extra G, so it's a GGLAM, galleries, gardens, libraries, archives, and museums. If you want to research queer history, if you want support, excellent researchers who can support the things that you do in your collection, that's what the Queer Heritage and Collections Network is for. So we're in the stall X1 way over there, and please connect with us. It's free to join, and there are, as of today, about 100 organizations conducting research in queer history and heritage that can help you do what you do best. So I would now like to introduce you to, in this order perhaps, our three speakers. So if you can come up to the microphone and in a booming voice tell us exactly who you are and what you do, please.
Hello, I am Cass Bradbeer. I am a student at the Courtauld Institute of Art, History of Art undergrad, and finishing it this year. At the same time, I've been running the LGBTQIA+ society there, producing workshops, talks, and exhibitions. Well, one exhibition that was really exciting, flagship first exhibition that we did this year. I am, apart from that, doing a little bit of things with other wonderful charitable queer organisations like Queer Britain, and I am looking forward to starting at the V&A and RCA Royal College of Art for my MA in September. Yes.
Big round of applause.
Hi. My pronouns are they, them, by the way. They, them.
Hello, my name is Holly James Johnston. I am many things. I am a program coordinator. I am a soon-to-be PhD student at the University of Oxford, asking how and why queer writers turned to the coming-of-age story in the early 20th century. And I also perform as a drag king under the name Orlando, which, if anyone likes Bloomsbury, I hope you get the reference. You should do. But as Orlando, I've been finding interesting intersects between drag as a performance art and museum and heritage. And as Orlando, I've worked with the V&A, Tate, and coming up, the National Gallery.
Hello everyone, just finding my angle. My name is Stephanie. I am the front of house and volunteer manager for the UK's first ever LGBTQ plus museum. Very, very exciting, opened last week. I have over 5 years experience working at institutions such as Tate, the Science Museum, Shakespeare's Globe, delivering commercial aspects as well as visitor experience packages to various institutions. And then when I'm not doing that, I am a proud trans woman, trans activist. I donate archival footage to Trans Pride, and I also am a trustee for the trans-led charity Gendered Intelligence. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Do you want to just stay there for a second? I think we'll just reverse the order slightly, but I'm going to stay here and just ask the question. And if you each want to take the lectern to answer the question. But Stephanie, at the moment, we do have the image that you chose, the 2 images that you've chosen to share with us. So maybe we'll start there, but then also the first question for all of you will be, what makes a good queer leader in our heritage and museum sector today? You know, I know that you've spent a lot of time recruiting the new front of house team. What makes a good leader, and what should we be thinking about as organizations that are trying to increase diversity, equality and inclusion? You know, what should we be thinking about?
I mean, what an excellent question. So for myself, what makes a good queer leader is someone with an active understanding of how it feels to belong to one of those underrepresented communities. As queer identifying people, and I'm sure a lot of you in the audience are, we've faced mass erasure from our contributions to history, specifically heritage, for most of living history. So for me, the thing that makes a good queer leader is someone who has lived experience of that erasure and knows kind of in their soul, in their essence, what it is that they want to do to be able to improve that and to educate the nation to our contributions. For myself, it was incredibly important when I was building the front of house team at Queer Britain to put a spotlight on queer creators, queer individuals with experience. These are my amazing 2 team leaders, Dev and Andrea. Dev and Andrea both have years and years of experience in their respective fields, from customer service to theatre as well as heritage, and they're both queer identifying individuals, and it was so important to me that the integral team to Queer Britain be people who were immersed or had allyship or identities within the communities that we were trying to represent. So I would say knowledge is the key to a good queer leader.
Thank you. Cass?
Hello. Yeah, I think that what's really particular about the people around me in my generation of new queer leaders in the arts sector is that I think we've had a lot of real first-hand experiences with the positives and negatives of hybrid, digital and in-person learning and community getting together under COVID in particular. I think we've learned a whole lot about the real, positives to do with the environment, for losing the carbon emissions that would be spent through travel, but at the same time we're aware of the lack of accessibility that can come with digital online arts events, that can come with things like technological poverty, and we're aware of the difficulties that can come with certain disabilities, and making sure that our digital platforms are as accessible as possible, and that we allow multiple ways of engaging that can also be about physical things. I've particularly come across this in terms of archiving queer experiences, where my friends who are all kind of on social media and have been contributing and really enjoying this have had a very different experience than to the queer elders in my community, who have found it more difficult to contribute to all these wonderful archives going on at the moment during COVID. So I think there is something about the understanding of the complexities to do with digital and physical stuff that that our generation is really good at. And also what I just want to say is about being in general just very values driven. You know, growing up through the school strike for climate, for environmentalism, or growing up through Black Lives Matter and Black Trans Lives Matter protests. I think these are aspects that we will bring to our leadership positions going forward, and they're so important. Next.
So, in response to Dan's question, what makes a good queer leader? I think there are three things, and I think it's the ability to communicate, to empathize, and to be diplomatic. The first one, to communicate, I think it's really important when we're talking about issues that historically haven't been brought out to wider audiences. I think you need to have that ability to talk to people outside of your own community and to sort of make it make sense to other people. I think that's very important, because if we can create understanding between queer communities and people who are not in the queer community, I think that's how we foster understanding and an ability to have a kind of shared focus and shared aims. Because I think if there's misunderstanding between where queer and minority communities are coming from in their need for more representation in museums, then there'll be a mismatch in what we think museums need. So that's the first one, effective communication. The second one is the ability to empathize, and I think I've chosen this because in my experience of bringing queer history to heritage organizations, you sometimes have to overcome barriers where there might be people in the organization who don't really see the need for that. And therefore, I think I've found the approach that works best is instead of becoming defensive and angry, actually, I found that it's really good to try and understand where they're coming from and to empathize with their point of view, because even if you disagree with that point of view, because it means that you can foster this shared understanding and potentially find a place of connection where both of you are on the same page and you can move forward in kind of increasing diversity and inclusion and representation in museum and heritage spaces. And then the third one was the ability also to be diplomatic, and that is very much on the same thread, because I think you are balancing many opposing forces when it comes to interpretation in museums and heritage. There are often many stories that these spaces want to tell, and it's the ability to balance these kind of not opposing but potentially sometimes competing stories, and finding ways to kind of create a cohesive overarching narrative where we can emphasize the stories that we want to emphasize, be that sort of queer, for instance, whilst also feeding into wider organizational and institutional narratives. So it's that ability to find balance, find understanding, so that we can all achieve our aims. So those are my three things.
Stay there, Holly, if you could. Thank you. The next question is going to be, and I think it's kind of relevant to the slides here as well, I'd love to get an idea from each three of you, because you've got a really good overview of all the different things that are happening in the sector. And there's a lot happening, right? We just said before, there's about 100 organizations, part of the network, that are engaged in queer history. So what have you seen over the last few years that you thought, oh, that's a really good example of doing queer history really well? And what is happening across generally as well that you think is, that can be done better, or we really should just be emphasizing the things that are being done great?
I think as someone who is a drag king and in their spare time performs drag, I think I found it very interesting when museums and heritage organizations are taking creative individuals who tend to be freelance and tend to have their own practices, and they're bringing them into their spaces. And I feel like this fosters a completely new dynamic, and it can completely transform and reimagine a space. And I think I found that very exciting to sort of marry those two aspects of my life. So here on the PowerPoint, that is Orlando. That is not me, I have to say, it's Orlando. At the Bishopsgate Institute, which is in East London, if anyone knows it. Hello. I'm sure you recognised the flags. So this was a photo shoot that I did a few years ago for a magazine called Loosh. But Loosh, as an independent print magazine run by a queer person who's also a drag king, they collaborated with the Bishopsgate Institute to put on a night of performance and talks, and there were zine workshops, there was a drag king makeup station, and I found the kind of collaboration between sort of drag and kind of creative art forms and an organization like really, really powerful. And I mean, a lot of the people in the queer community were saying that it was amazing that, I mean, the Bishopsgate Institute is very set up well for this because it is an LGBT archive primarily. So obviously drag found a natural home there, but at the same time, the fact that the drag art form and the kind of the archive, to sort of in with a capital A, were sort of talking to each other and putting on an event together. I think it was a really interesting development that you might not have seen a few years ago. And I've seen increasingly sort of museums and heritage organizations bringing drag kings and queens as one example into their spaces. And I think it's exciting and also fun. Like, it is just fun, and it's sort of, I think that's a very important thing because, you know, when people are having fun and enjoying themselves, you know, that can be a prime place to educate, really. So I would say that that is one of the very exciting new developments that I've seen from my perspective as someone who is also a drag king in the last few years.
Hello. Yeah, so many things come to mind as really good examples of queer museum activity going on at the moment. One of the things that I've really loved is shows that have this interactive, constantly evolving aspect that I thought was really well exemplified by the Pitt Rivers Museum's Beyond the Binary exhibition that closed recently. I particularly appreciated the way in which visitors were given free rein to scrawl, basically, to write their own things across all of the walls, basically, and the text panels of the exhibition, which thereby inbuilt a kind of participatory transient aspect into the show that allowed visitors to get all their voices heard. And I tried to emulate that a little bit in the exhibition that I have here, that I curated at the Arts and Community Centre in North Paddington, called Grand Junction, which is run by the Paddington Development Trust. At this show, if you see on the image on the left, the panel closest to the left was actually a submissions panel for visitors who came in to bring in their own artworks and to basically add in and make their mark on the show. And I really like that kind of stuff. One particular example that I've been studying recently that I just really want to mention that I've been loving is this example of a entirely autonomous, community-driven museum and collective archive activity run in the last 5 years by this Vietnamese queer artist called Dinh Tien Nhung, and she is working in Hanoi and Saigon at the moment to basically encourage small community spaces to open up their doors to queer people, to allow them to come in, bring in their stuff, and just showcase their own queer heritage in the way that they want to, and use that space to not only show their work, but to live, to eat. They do ritual performance eating there. They do, anyway, the transient kind of participatory aspect of these shows is what I really love the most. Thank you.
Hello again. So the first thing that comes into my mind as a good representation of queer identities within the heritage sector would be the 2017-2018 exhibit at Take Britain, Queer British Art. I'm sure some people here went to it. And also just to say that heritage institutions in general, specifically after the pandemic, but probably since 2015 moving forwards, there was a huge push towards internal LGBTQ communities within heritage institutions. And so I'd say that that's another really good example of where we've been moving forwards. I hope Dan doesn't mind me kind of going off on the improvement route a little bit. But for myself specifically, and I'm sure lots of you who are visitor experience based or who are customer service based or who work in the archives, the focus for queer voices in heritage is so often specifically based on curation. And that's brilliant. We love to see shows about queer artists, and we love to see those voices elevated to the platform to stand shoulder to other great artists. But where we're falling short is we're not involving queer voices in the initial conversation about visitor experience, things that you wouldn't even imagine that would involve them, things like archivism, ticketing and sales, visitor experience, social media presence, internal marketing comms, things like that, things that people from the outside looking into a heritage institution wouldn't even think of, because when people think of careers in heritage, they think of curation and archivism, and that's pretty much it. And then we walk into a room, oh hi, I'm the visitor experience manager, oh hi, I'm the front of house manager, and I also happen to be trans. And it's really key to me to involve those voices of those queer leaders and community groups early in the conversations, not just in the art on our walls, but in the space that we're providing. Is it a safe space, or is it an unsafe space with a white queer artist on the walls? Is it a safe space for community-led participation, or is it just a group discussion that has come from a group of cisgendered white individuals? That is where we are, and that's what we're facing. Queer representation and curation is amazing, but queer voices need to be involved in every aspect and every element, each step of the way, in all of the conversations throughout and across heritage.
Do you want a microphone to drop it?
So I got very impassioned there, I do apologise.
Sorry, the question to Stephanie was, would you like this microphone just so you can drop it? I think that was incredibly good. And it's inspired a further critique, I think. Holly, you've got some thinking around this as well. Thank you very much, Stephanie. That was, I think, a very poignant statement.
Dan has asked me to be critical, so I'm going to be. Yes, seconding what Stephanie has said, I think the thing that I've noticed, because I feel like a lot of museum and heritage sectors really embraced the LGBTQ tour, which I think as an intervention is very powerful and a brilliant first step. And I feel like it is very much a springboard for more kind of activity in these sectors and these spaces for queer representation. But what I will say is it's very much a temporary intervention. I mean, if you, for instance, if you don't go on the tour and there isn't something there signposting queerness, you may well miss that interpretation. So it's a fleeting intervention, the LGBTQ tour, and I think they are a wonderful place to start, but I think they are only the start, and they are not necessarily a means to an end, but a stepping stone. And I think that's quite important because, yeah, you need something permanent. We need something which is going to last. And there are many ways to facilitate this, but that takes an institutional and organizational wide effort. And we need to think about collections, labeling, interpretation, and it goes sort of more internal as well. It's about training staff and volunteers and making sure that they're equipped with training so that if questions come up, you know, they can be addressed. So yeah, I would say it's been amazing to watch how organizations have embraced LGBTQ tours. They brought new audiences into these spaces. That is very important, but I don't think that should be seen as, okay, well, we've got the LGBTQ tour, you know, what more can we do? It's exciting. What more can we do? It should spark our imaginations and our creativity.
Thank you, Holly. Let's have a bit of audience participation again, just to kind of work out exactly where we are at in terms of in terms of the things that you do. So who does actually do tours at their collection, at their glam? I've only got one. Oh, okay, so there's a small proportion actually that does tours. So leads people around the collection. Who has, I hope more hands will go up now, who actually has queer stuff in their collection? Okay, so about a third maybe? So we went from, oh, we've got the Queen in there as well, waving. Oh, it's a so-so. Okay, sort of. I see. I thought it was the Jubilee time. Okay, so who actually has put on an exhibition? I don't mind if it's gone up and down. So again, a very small proportion. And I suppose, what else have we got? Friday Late? Has anybody done Friday Late programming that is queer? I feel like you've all got to work a lot harder. And we'll come to exactly, because the next question will be about advice. How do we get this happening? Because I've been on that stall for most of this morning, and some of the questions that have, the key question I'd say that has been put to me is, what advice do you have for getting us started? So how do we get a Friday Late happening? How do we get a exhibition happening? How do we get a tour happening? I suppose what else is there? It's just and stuff in the collection. So whether or not you're actually in your collections properly labeling it, you know, are you labeling the things so it can actually be found when people go online? Is your collection even online? But that's an even bigger topic, isn't it? But I suppose I turn back to our, maybe in this order, so props to going to the far end. What advice would you have for a collection in terms of, you've got a standing room only audience in front of you. So everybody here wants to be engaged in queer history and heritage. So how do you get your organization on board? How do you get it happening at your particular collection?
Good luck. I would say the first thing that comes to mind for me is broadening the range of interpretive frameworks that we use to establish what we define as queer in the collection. Particularly, I've been really excited by some just chats that I've been having with my queer and trans peers, going around museums and saying, you know, look at that ancient sculpture of a deity with no genitals defined on their crotch. That kind of feels like, it looks like a Barbie. It feels trans resonant to me. That's how I see myself, some of my friends were saying. You know, things like that are real things that we, particular objects that we could intervene in the labels and just put a quote from a trans community member who's involved in your museum and say, you know, this was something that resonated with one of the visitors. This adds to the object's value, interpretive value, in a way that I think hasn't been tried that much, and I think it should be. I think that would probably be my big main thing. I'm sure the others have amazing, wonderful things to suggest as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Hello again. So I would say that my biggest advice, especially from a visitor experience kind of commercial background, very front of house focus background, is don't be afraid to engage with community-led organisations. I mean, for all of the cisgendered straight allies in the audience, I think there's a misconception that reaching out to a community-led group is going to be a very almost extremist way to go, that they're going to have combative opinions that are going to completely disregard everything you've already considered, that they're going to have defensive attitudes towards something that you're presenting. So my recommendation is to not be afraid to engage with those groups, because so often those groups are just waiting and yearning to have an established heritage institution reach out to them and give them a platform to elevate what they're speaking about. So anyone in London, reach out to the London LGBTQ+ Centre on South Bank. Reach out to Gendered Intelligence to have trans voices. Make sure that you're reaching out to POC and Black Pride so that you can have those voices in the conversation early on. Don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to be shot down, because it's all just about a learning period. And don't be so afraid to put a foot wrong. I think that's another thing that our kind of modern day society is dictating, is as institutions, we often do nothing because we're afraid of doing the wrong thing. And what that actually is doing is stagnating us as an industry and not actually pushing us forward to a point where all voices are a valid part of the conversation. So don't be afraid to make a mistake. Don't be afraid to make a mistake and then reach out to an organisation to correct that mistake, to invite those community-led voices to be able to interact with you and tell you how to improve. And just make sure that you are really incorporating those voices at every stage, stages you wouldn't even think about. Make sure that every conversation, every boardroom meeting you walk into for the next however many months are left of this, I've just opened a museum, I'm very tired. However months left of this year are, every meeting you walk into, I want you to think about the queer voice that might have an opinion on the discussion that you're bringing about. Whether that's on a late night, a new exhibition, a visitor experience element, whether it's on ticketing, are you being economically inclusive of the LGBT community who often live in poverty? Where the percentages of people who can afford to go to a £25 exhibition are not high enough. So for me, it's really about not being afraid to reach out to those groups because they're there to communicate, they want to be elevated, and don't be afraid to make a mistake because it's just part of the learning experience.
So my answer is twofold. I think the first thing would be get in a specialist, an LGBTQ consultant who might be able to kickstart things and present you with some ideas. I think especially if you're feeling a bit sort of, you don't know where to start. LGBTQ training for staff and volunteers goes a long way in terms of changing institutional kind of perspectives, and that can be facilitated by a specialist. And I think my second answer would be just get creative. I think a really good model for this is Hull Museums. I mean, they have done so much and it's creative what they've done. So on their website, they have blog posts. They have a playlist, which I loved. They host community groups. They've got a reading list and a book club. And I just thought these are really good, fun ideas. But also, the reason why I think Hull Museums is such a good exemplary model of how museums and heritage can do it is because they have, from day one, always involved the community, and it's a two-way discussion. It's not, well, we're going to do queer interpretation, but we're going to tell it to you. They have invited the community into their queer spaces, and they've said, well, what do you want to see from us? What can we do for you to serve you? And I think Lauren Field from Hull Museums, she said something at a conference a couple of months ago, which really struck me. And she said, people come to us and thank us for representing them. But she said, you know, they shouldn't be thanking us. You know, they shouldn't feel grateful. It should just be expected, and that they should have always been brought through the front door and brought into the room. So I thought that was really powerful.
Thank you very much, Holly. Well, we are now going to go to Q&A time. So if you have any questions for our three leaders that we have here, the next generation in queer museum enterprise. That's a spaceship sound. Sorry, Colin, take over.
Thank you. And I've got a roving mic, so hands up and come and let's have some questions, please, from the floor. There must be one. Yes, over there. Put it up close, yeah?
Thank you. This one goes out to the trio and to Mr. Vo, just on the nature of the network itself. I think, I can only speak for myself, of course, but I think I've probably had more fun in the past hour and a half meeting people in this room than I have in meeting any strangers over the past 2 years. As such, as well as the academic and work-based and cultural side of this network that is being set up, I wanted to ask, is there a more personal meetup or social side to this organization or this group that's set up? If so, how do I join it? If not, how do we set it up?
Do you want to move? You go. You go.
I don't want to be out of the camera.
Oh.
Yeah, no. Thank you very much. I can't remember your name, but we are competing for best waistcoat at the exhibition as well. So, if I could just plug the museum again, and all these images that you've been seeing, there's Stuart Feather, who's an early founder of GLF, the Gay Liberation Front, 50 years this year, so momentous for us to be opening on that year, this particular anniversary year. If I could just say that we will be opening Queer Art Club on Sundays at the museum, so that means that at 1 o'clock, yeah, you can go woo if you want to. It means that we'll be inviting you to come to see us. And so we will have a space where it will be a place where you can come and be creative, explore your queer creativity amongst other people around you. So for that hour and a half that you're there with us, you can have the best fun that you've had in the last couple of years by, creating art side by side with someone. And I suppose, Cass, you know this as well, that sometimes for some people, it's easier to meet somebody and talk to somebody and get to know somebody when they're doing something else as well. And I think that it's really nice to be able to do it where we're going to be looking at the art that's in the galleries, but then downstairs we're going to be making chaos. It's going to be colourful, it's going to be bright, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And so come along to that.
Okay.
Love that. Is that that's the Queer Britain? Not the yes, that's Queer Britain. It's really exciting. For networks, I'd also really recommend the Queer Heritage Forum, which you can find on Twitter. I love them. They gave me helped me find my first opportunity to do some queer archival, sharing stuff online, and it led to a podcast that I did. They're wonderful and they're just fun people. Other networks that I'd really encourage that are in London are the Queer Youth Art Collective, which is really wonderful, and also the National Feminist Gender Equality Network, who are an amazing network of trans inclusive academics, which is really needed in these difficult times. Yeah.
Okay. So I would say in terms of reaching out and a kind of community-led base, obviously at Queer Britain, myself and Dan Vo, and obviously everyone else on this panel, we're working tirelessly to involve education groups, Sunday art club starting from this weekend. Yes, very exciting. Got to staff that front of house. So very, very exciting kind of projects coming up. And then don't be afraid to reach out to more corporate LGBTQ plus organisations such as Consortium, because they always have excellent links to heritage roles as well as institutions. And like I said, the LGBTQ plus South Bank Centre, it's always a great place to go, and they have an amazing programme of different kind of markets and things like that, and it's a great opportunity to go and look at queer stockists as well. So I would say that definitely try Consortium, and obviously come to Queer Britain to expand your queer network. Please do.
I only have one suggestion, and it's drag related, but it's Bar Whatever at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern. They are now operating on every other week on a Tuesday, and that's where I debuted as Orlando back in the day. And I think it's pretty much the only consistently run, I mean, they've been running for over 12, 13 years now, community-focused drag nights in London. And there's always a segment where they raise money for charity, and they ask people to come up and share what they are doing in the community. And I've always just thought it is the most welcoming, friendly place. And they even have some things called teddy bears. So if you come on your own, there is someone who's looking out for people who may be a little bit vulnerable, who might sort of seem a bit uncomfortable, and they will offer a friendly face. So I think, Bar Whatever, if no one's discovered it, go, because you'll have a good time, and it's just very feel good. So that is my one recommendation to you.
Okay, more questions from the floor, please. One there, then one there, yeah? Put the mic up close.
Hiya. It's guests. You've all spoken quite a lot and very interestingly about engaging people who are not as familiar with queer spaces and the queer community as obviously most of the people in this talk probably are, which I think is really important. In the space where I work, which is the Leeds Library, we have a really small exhibition space, and I'm hoping to try and kind of worm my way in to doing an LGBT History Month exhibition there. And I was wondering if you had any advice on how to curate something that is both kind of, I don't want to use the word gentle, but a good introduction for people who outside of the community, especially as a lot of the members of the library, of our library, are on the older side, but nuanced enough to be interesting to people who are in the community. So how would you recommend, or any advice on balancing that?
Anyone want to start? Or, okay. So I would say, in regards to, I know, as I mentioned earlier, don't be afraid to say that you want something gentler, that you don't want something maybe as polarizing as some of the very big art exhibitions are, because we have to take into account, and I think part of the reason that I'm present on this panel is to think about commerciality and affordability and speaking to our target audience and all of those important things. In terms of facilitating a small show like that in a small exhibition space, I think the first thing I need to say very openly is be prepared for any negative feedback for any size of space that you're doing, because regardless of whether or not it's themed towards a 35 to 65 age demographic, or members only, or paid participation, or whatever it is, that you really need to expect pushback from other communities, because it's a polarizing thing regardless of the size that we do it at. And I would say, again, advice for creating that is, don't just think about what's going on the walls. Make sure that you're not just representing queer people here, but you're also representing queer people here. Make sure that you've got someone on board in the exhibition team who has awareness in the community. There are freelance I go out into institutions and I do kind of recruitment advisory boards and things like that, as well as kind of safe space advocacy. So reach out to people to make sure that you're reaching kind of all of those pinch points as well. But I would say that just be aware, for a not so polarizing exhibition, you will still get probably just as much criticism as you would doing a massive, flaming queer, glitter everywhere, rainbow wings, yes queen, all of that. All of it. So I would just say to involve people from the community and prepare your staff for what will definitely be a little bit of community pushback. But without that kind of struggle, we don't move forwards. But I love the idea of a small exhibition space. Love it. But I also like the idea of big exhibition spaces, just in case anyone's wondering.
I'd say it can be sometimes just about picking themes, picking something that's going to be really approachable and means something to a wide range of different groups. For me, I'm working on something at the moment that's to do with bringing environmentalism and ecology to kind of unite with queerness and transness in art. And I think I've found personally that that's been a real opener to kind of light-hearted, beautiful, but also heavy and important subject matter to do with environmentalism, but not necessarily something that would cause a lot of complaints. That's something that kind of just comes to mind for me, and I've been really loving at the moment. So yeah, sometimes it could just be about picking a theme that's really approachable and means a lot to a lot of people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. We are the last session here, so I think we can just carry on, can't we? I don't see why we need to finish it. The show shuts at 5, but we've got a bit more time. Another question here.
Just a quick one, really. So I am really interested in SEND museums. I'm autistic and I've got ADHD, so I'm really looking for the kind of intersect between queer history and SEND stuff. Are there any projects that you guys know about that would be good, or any groups that's kind of queer disability stuff?
I'm trying to remember their names. I might have to come back to you on this. I'm definitely following a few wonderful organizations on Instagram that are queer.disabilities.group or something like that. But there are definitely groups out there. Some work that I've been seeing going on that was really interesting at the moment, actually, that I saw come up in my feed, was that the Horniman Museum is doing some work specifically for for up-and-coming SEND people in the heritage sector, that also as part of that work that they do, kind of like it's like a semi-decently paid internship, there's also queer content within that. So that's something that will come to mind. But yes, apart from that, I can't think of anything, sorry. But yes, yeah, it's really important, and yeah.
So I would say organisations such as Para Pride, Rainbow UK, and then the one that I have used myself is Disabled Queer and Here. So I would say that those are some brilliant organisations to go to. If you recognise a gap in the communities for disabled-led LGBTQ+ programming, then I would recommend ourselves as a home to facilitate community-led organisations. We're entirely accessibly friendly, and at the moment our exhibition is a visual retrospective, so you don't have to worry about kind of physical objects necessarily. We have steps in place for people who are visually impaired, so I would recommend that if you see or recognise that gap, then definitely write to us and let's create something together. But I would say, you know, Para Pride, Queer in Here, Rainbow UK, they're really, really important organisations.
Okay, we have time for at least one more question, maybe a bit more. Anyone else from the floor? Okay, no, maybe it finishes here. In fact, let's have a big thank you to all our speakers. And thank you to you as an audience, because you have made this session in this theatre the largest one today. So thank you. Before you go, there are 4 things at least for you to do. One of them is, if you've got any further questions for the speakers, please come up and chat afterwards, if that's okay with them. The second one is, come and see me if you have an idea for an M&H show session to share for next year. It could be a half idea. Any work that you've done relating to audiences or engaging people that you'd like to share with the sector, because that's how the M&H show works. We share our work with the sector. So please come and see me, and then we could see if we can shape that. Come and see me if you are interested in improving the visitor experience. I'll also be around tomorrow around the show if you want to say hi and have a chat about your venue. And can you drop a line to the M&H show? The website is info@museumandheritage.com. Sorry, the email address. That's a pretty simple one, isn't it? info@museumandheritage.com. Thank you very much.
I'm really sorry, Colin. I'm going to have to hijack. If this is a ship, this is a mutiny. I want to send our 3 speakers into the center. So grab your phones out. So go into the center. Colin, this was your phrase, and I loved it. You whispered it to me. So everybody, I want you to have a good look at your speakers again and recognize that this is what change looks like. That's what you said, Colin. This is what change looks like. So this is your next generation of queer leaders. So on the count of 3, you're going to honor them with a giant booming queer. So 1, 2, 3. Thank you so much for coming and seeing us. Big round of applause for them again. And to Colin, thank you. Visit Queer Britain. Join the network. Cut me off now.